Hello, everybody. Welcome to our author story time. I'm so excited for you to join us this evening with your family. And hopefully, you will, during this time, be able to learn some amazing gems about the background story of some of your favorite children's books. As you're coming in, I just want to introduce myself as Jarima Gorham. I am the founder, executive director of Burst Into Books, which is a nonprofit here in Chicago that is really about just empowering our families and community through literacy. And I really believe that stories matter. And so even in our programming, we're really intentional about relationship building and understanding one another. And I am so excited about tonight's conversation because I believe that through her work, I learned about so many people's stories. And I think the same is true for you and your family. So as you're coming in, say hello. If you have questions or if you want to make a comment, put it in the chat and I'll be sure to bring it up. But I'm not going to hesitate any longer and just go ahead and introduce our guest for tonight. So tonight we have Ms. Lesa Cline-Ransome, who will be our guest author. How are you?
I am great. Thank you, Jarima. Thanks for having me here.
Yes. So we'll have so many great questions and conversation. Again, as people are watching, if they pose questions, I'll bring them up as well. But again, before we get into all the amazing people story that you have written about, let's talk about your story. So the beginning, how did we get to the journey of the extraordinary author Lesa Cline-Ransome? What's a little bit of your background?
So my background, I guess from the beginning, I grew up in Malden, Massachusetts, which is right outside of Boston. I am the daughter of two nurses. Both my mother and father were nurses. I'm the youngest of three. And I was really lucky to grow up in a household filled with a father who loved music and a mother who loved books. So I feel like I grew up in a very rich household that was filled with dinner time every night at 5:30, and we would get up from the table around 7:30 because we loved to talk and share stories. My mother was an avid reader. She brought me to the library every single week. She worked a night shift as a nurse, took me to the library every single Saturday, and that's where I fell in love with books and words and stories. My mother was always like kind of eccentric, I guess. And so she never learned to drive. And she learned to drive later in life, but we used to take public transportation everywhere. And we would sit on buses and trains, and she would tell me stories or read to me from the books that she read. And so I just loved hearing words and stories. And I thought maybe I would grow up to be a writer. And I thought the only type of writer I could be maybe was a journalist. I don't know where I got this idea, but I went off to like a program for journalism students in high school. Like students maybe thought they wanted to be journalists. And I realized maybe I'm not cut out for writing or journalism because I was so shy and I didn't like that type of writing. I didn't want to do a whole lot of research. So I went off to college to study fashion merchandising at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. Yeah. Yeah. So it was like a complete
total shift.
Yeah. So I was like, well, forget it. But while I was at Pratt, I wound up taking every single writing course they had, and I wound up being a fashion copywriter. And but while I was at Pratt, I met an illustration student at a Purple Rain party. It was like all Prince music, and his name was James Ransom.
Okay.
And the funny thing is behind me, I realized you can see the picture of us when we were in college. That's us.
Oh, wow.
James is we got married, started a family, and now he's the illustrator of many of my books. But so my path to writing took a really interesting detour. But that's basically, I wasn't sure that I thought there was only that type of writing. And so I veered away, but then I kept coming back to writing because I just love stories, words, and writing.
I love it. So for this question, I know you told me like a bunch of different instances in which writing was a part of your story. But when was the decision of like, I'm going to be a children's book author or a particular genre of writing? Like what led you to that type of writing?
So, I mentioned I was working as a fashion copywriter. And then after a while, I thought, I don't really like copywriting. I don't like this at all. I want to do something else. I wanted to do something that I felt was more impactful. And so I actually went back to graduate school to get a master's in education and to work with children. I wanted to work with Black children, and I wanted to be sure that Black children were getting a solid foundation in education and reading. And so I got my master's degree in education just as I realized I'm pregnant. So,
Wow,
yes. So we started a family. I worked a little bit as a substitute teacher while I was pregnant, and then we moved away, started a family. And the plan was I was going to stay at home and be an at-home mom for a while. And we had our first daughter, Jamie. And I was home and I was like, I don't think this is going to work out for me. I don't think I like being at home. I miss writing. I was kind of complaining a lot. My husband said, maybe you should write. Maybe you should write. You have a background in education. You love writing. I'm illustrating children's books. You should write a children's book. And I thought, what, are you a fool? Like, how am I going to write? Our daughter is not sleeping. When am I going to write a children's book? I don't even know anything about writing children's books. And he was like, there's this story I just read. You should read it. It's a story about the Negro League pitcher, Satchel Paige. I was like, I don't even know how to play baseball. Why would I be writing a story about a baseball player? I'm like, he is so stupid. And so anyhow, I read the story. I thought, oh my goodness, this is a great story. I love this idea. And so I contacted someone that he knew, and I started writing. And I contacted an editor that he knew. I started writing. I sent it in. And she encouraged me to keep writing. She said, you have a nice voice. Keep writing. And I kept writing and kept writing. And she really worked with me for about 2 years. And then she offered my first contract.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So that is amazing. So 2 years of really just perfecting your craft. And I love the fact she said she could hear your voice. You had a nice voice in what you were writing.
She could hear my voice.
Was that story of Satchel Paige like the beginning of the inspirations of the type of stories that you chose to start writing about?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Malden, Massachusetts. And in Malden, it was a lovely town, but it was a town where our family was one of the very few African-American families in that town. And being one of the only African-American families, I feel like I was often in classrooms, the only Black child in the classroom, where often the stories of my culture, my ancestry wasn't talked about. Basically, I feel like erased. Yeah. And so hearing the story of Satchel Paige, the Negro Leagues, it's really the first time I really read about the Negro Leagues. I thought, how did I not know about the Negro Leagues? And so just reading about that and writing that story and diving into the Negro Leagues, I thought, where are all these other stories I never heard about? Yeah. What am I doing? Like, what happened to my education? So I felt like I was relearning history in some way. So like once I finished Satchel Paige, I thought, what else? What else don't I know? And then the story right after that, I was watching the Olympics, and there was this little short segment about this cyclist, who at the turn of the century named Major Taylor, he was a champion at the turn of the century in 1900. I thought, how did I never hear this story? Like, where are all these stories of these amazing, incredible African-American heroes I've never heard? And so I started writing that story. And so I thought, like, this is something I really want to do. I want to write stories, these unheard, untold stories from history that I never heard. So that's kind of why I started writing.
And what you just said just hit me in so many ways, because I would say for me, I didn't really learn about a lot of the history of our culture until I went to college. And it was only because I was actually in a course that was studying African American lit and history. And I felt the same way of how have I went 18, 19 years and not know, not even knowing the history of Chicago, just the impact of Chicago, like the history of the Chicago Defender, just the history of all these different things. Even you just saying Major Taylor, like I said, I live by his trail. I've lived there my whole life,
Yes.
and I've seen this name, but it means something different once I understand what that name is. And I think that it's so important, as you said, if I go to education, never seeing myself or really hearing the stories, I in some ways feel like, did I play a part? But then once I started learning what part I play, I then am even more encouraged to want to learn more about myself. So
Exactly. I mean, he lived most of his life in Massachusetts. Here I am in Massachusetts, yet he's not a part of the curriculum in Massachusetts. That story is not told at all. I mean, what's happening there? How do I not know his name? How do, not only me, but how do all white students never hear his name? I think it's just, it's just really sad. But again, like you said, but going to college and taking African American studies courses, all of a sudden your whole world is open up. You're like, wait a minute, what?
yeah,
What is happening? So yeah, so I feel like that's kind of what inspires me to write the stories that I write. And my focus is in elevating and opening up these stories to young readers.
yeah, and I love the fact that because they're in children's books, they're not going to wait till they're 18 to hear this story.
Exactly.
Right? I'm going to
Exactly.
be 7 or 8, and I'm going to learn more and more about all these amazing individuals. And I may even just barely hear their name in the history book, but I think what I love so much about your books is I feel, because I love documentaries. I feel like I'm reading documentaries, right? Like I'm like, oh my gosh. But I think
Yes.
it's awesome because that's the intriguing part that I think that many of our children miss, is just knowing the background of these figures. And
Mm-hmm.
then you're able to see yourself and you're able to see connections with them.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So with, we talked about, okay, 2 years perfecting your craft. And even though like, okay, now you're ready. How difficult was it though to write your first book? Even if you had like that segue, it's like, okay, now, we
Yeah.
see children's book, but I've learned more and more that it is a craft and a skill. So how difficult was it to make the very first book?
It was really difficult. It was difficult because I'm gonna go into a subject that maybe, I don't know. I'm just gonna be honest here. I think that women writers have a really difficult time because I think, especially as mothers, I think that we tend to want to care for everybody else before we care for ourselves or our craft. And
Yep.
so I think I spent a lot of time trying to make sure that my kids were taken care of. I'm a mother of 4. And so I was trying to make sure that, kids were taken care of and that the house was taken care of and appointments were made and lunches were made and breakfast. And then, I did some laundry and then this and that. And, and so then I thought, well, after all that's done, then I'll sit down and then I'll start, on my writing. And then what would happen was when I sat down to write, there was very little left, for me to
Wow.
give my writing. And so my writing was like just taking last place and it was suffering, I thought. And so my dear friend said to me, I was talking to her and I was complaining. Oh, I'm always complaining about something, but I was complaining to her. And she said, so if you really want any shot at a writing career, you will invest in daycare. You will invest in yourself and writing. So even if it's 1 day a week or 2 days a week, even if it's 2 hours, you will put your daughter in daycare for 2 hours. And during that 2 hours, you will not be making appointments or doing laundry. You will go to a desk in a quiet place. You will close the door and you will start working. And so that's what I did. It was 2 hours a week or 4 hours a week, or I would ask my parents to come and just help me out a little bit so I could sit and I could just write and have time to focus on my writing. So it was really hard. Um, it was just hard finding the space and time to write that first book. And the second book and third book until the kids got older and they went to school. But it was very hard, I thought, to find the time and space to write.
Yeah, I love the fact that you mentioned just by the end, it's like I didn't have anything to give, and I think just
Yeah.
the importance of investment in ourselves and whatever we're pursuing, of just really making the intentional time to do it,
Yes.
especially when we know it's our passion or what we want to do.
Hmm.
We have to we have to plan it. We just can't on a whim, like, oh, I'm going to do this. Or, I think
Yes.
about it even with my health and anything that we say we want to do, like
Yep.
it has to be a plan,
Yes.
because if not, you're going to, like you said, especially as a mother, I understand you're going to care for those around us. And then by the time it's time for us to give to us, we may be already drained.
Mhm. Yeah,
Already
absolutely.
drained. Yes.
Absolutely.
So then once you get your rhythm, so, okay, I'm investing in myself. I'm going to make sure that this is a priority. What have you now created as like your research creative process when it comes to really going after like creating your pieces in your work? Like, what is really like a system that you created to, get it done?
So generally I follow what is my curiosity. So I will, let's say I'll find something, or I'll be reading an article, and I'll say, oh my God, that's really fascinating, or I didn't know that, or what, that happened when or how, and I will try to find out something else about it. I'll start researching it. And then I'll start thinking about it maybe through the lens of a child. Like, could this be a story for children? And so then I'll start exploring a little bit more, and trying to figure out, can I craft this into a story for children? And in what genre? Would it be a picture book? Would it be a middle grade? Would it be a YA? And so then I'll just start exploring and kind of like opening up doors. Um, Usually one thing might lead to another. So, like, for example, I was working on a book about Frederick Douglass, a picture book about Frederick Douglass. And I was really interested in the fact, there's been, like, you have to always find an interesting way to tell a story, and a way it's been told. You have to find a way to tell it differently than it's been told before, because there's a lot of books about Frederick Douglass, right?
Exactly.
So I was particularly interested in, as a person who's an avid reader, right? I was really interested in the fact that he, while enslaved, was really fascinated by reading,
Yeah.
and wanted and equated reading and education with freedom.
Yep.
And so I started doing a lot of research about, writing this picture book. And so I discovered that in this research that there's all this, background information about the education of African Americans. Then I found this little paragraph about how African Americans, or how enslaved people, used to dig these holes in the ground while they were enslaved, and teach each other to learn to read, in these places called pit schools. And I thought, pit schools? Slaves used to make pit schools to learn to read? I thought, what? So I jotted that down, a little card, put it aside. Then I started reading about these colored schools that opened after the end of slavery. And I thought, what? So I wrote that down. So I was like opening doors into other books that I could maybe explore, just because of the research. Like, the more you research, the more doors open, and you find even more avenues for stories to tell. And so often, I'm looking at a book or looking at research, and I find these incredible little nuggets that I'm going to keep exploring, or more stories that I'm going to tell.
I love it. So has any of your exploration like taking you to those locations, or, traveling to where these places that you're writing about?
Yes, I have. I do, on occasion, travel. I know that I have visited, like, Colonial Williamsburg, or visited, recreated slave cabins in Virginia, and in South Carolina, the Middleton Plantation. I've even visited. I worked on a book called "Before There Was Mozart," about the son of an enslaved woman and a plantation owner, and he became the person who inspired the works of Mozart, Chevalier de Saint George. So I actually visited Guadeloupe and France, where he lived. So I was able to visit those places. So I do on occasion visit. Often sometimes I can't, but I try to.
Yeah. So we're getting to, which I'm excited, an opportunity for a live reading. However, I was really, really intrigued with your latest work, and I wanted to just talk about, because I love titles of books, right?
Mhm.
So the title of this book was The Overground Railroad.
Yes.
So can you speak a little bit to what inspired that title and just even the interest in the story?
So I read what I consider probably one of the most fascinating books I've ever read, called The Warmth of Other Suns, The Epic Story of America's Great Migration by Isabel Wilkerson, several years ago. And this is a perfect example of a story that just opens a doorway into all these other stories. The Great Migration, which I never knew it was called The Great Migration, but my parents are the product of the Great Migration. Both my parents are born in the South, my father in North Carolina, my mother in Virginia. They both moved north when they were young, in the 20s and in the 30s. And so, they're the product of the Great Migration. And so we all know about the Underground Railroad, about people escaping north. But the Overground Railroad refers to the railway systems that people traveled on to come north during the Great Migration. And so I thought, well, that's just such a like, I never knew that. I thought that was so fascinating. All these people leaving south, coming north for better opportunities. And so I really just used it to tell the story of one fictional family who was leaving North Carolina and coming north for the hope of better opportunities. And it's told in train stops. And it's a parallel story of Ruth Ellen, who happens to be reading the book of Frederick Douglass. And her story is told, in parallel. Like, here's this young man who's escaping slavery, but they're reading a book and wanting education, and her story is leaving behind everything that she also knows, looking for something better, looking for a better education. So their stories are told in tandem. So that's the story of Overground Railroad.
Wow, I love it. And I think that, like you said, these stories are going to open up more conversations, because I can just think about even my peers. All of us have majority family that originates in the South.
Yeah,
Even though we're in Chicago, I mean,
yes.
it's either Mississippi. My dad is from Tennessee. My mom's family is from Chicago, actually. But I just think it's interesting to just talk to people like, oh, we're going to our reunion in Louisiana. We're going to our Louisiana, North Carolina. It's like, wow. And we all ended up into this city, and so just the stories behind that, I think, is so important as well. So we are at our time where we have a live reading. And I have asked Lesa to read one of her many, many books that I love about Harriet. And so I want to, during this time when you read, Lesa, I'm actually going to give you the full screen so that they'll be able to see the reading. And once you're done, then I'll join back in.
Okay. All right. Here. So I will read from Before She Was Harriet. And let's see here. So I can do this. Okay. I want to show the pictures. So this is, I should mention, this is illustrated by my husband, James Ransome. And here. And I'll read a page and then I'll show you the pictures. Okay. Here she sits, an old woman, tired and worn, her legs stiff, her back achy. This page. Sorry about that. The page got stuck. But before wrinkles formed and her eyes failed, before she reached her twilight years, she could walk for miles and see clearly under a sky lit only with stars. Before she was an old woman, she was a suffragist, a voice for women who had none, in marriages, in courts, in voting booths. Before her voice became soft and raspy, it was loud and angry, rising above injustice. Before she was a suffragist, she was General Tubman, rising out of the fog, armed with courage, strong in the face of rebels and planters and overseers, as they watch fields burn and bridges fall, and 700 slaves stop chopping and start running to a woman who ferried them to freedom on the Combahee River, turned River Jordan. Before she was General Tubman, she was a Union spy, carrying secrets across battlefields to soldiers fighting in the Civil War for President Lincoln to end slavery. Before she was a Union spy, she was a nurse, caring for those hit with bullets and hatred and fear, tending to them with bandages and words in the bloody dirt of Southern soil. Before she was a nurse, she was Aunt Harriet, daughter of Ben and Rit, who helped her parents flee their master and find their way through woods and streams to the safety of Canada and a new home in the North. Before she was Aunt Harriet, she was Moses, a conductor on an underground railroad with no trains and no tracks, just passengers traveling to freedom up north, through swamps, past slave catchers, across rivers, under the cover of night. Seeking the promised land for her people, led by dreams and God and faith, a wisp of a woman with the courage of a lion. Before she was Moses, she was Minty of Maryland, of one slave owner and then others, who worked her, punished her with lashes, broke her back, but not her spirit. Before she was Minty, she was Araminta, a young girl taught by her father to read the woods and the stars at night, readying for the day. She'd leave behind slavery, along with her name, and pick a new one, Harriet. And remember her days as a suffragist, as a general, as a spy, as a nurse, as Aunt Harriet, as Moses, as a conductor. As Minty, as Araminta, who dreamed of living long enough to one day be old, stiff, and achy, tired and worn and wrinkled and free. And
I love that story. I love it, like you said, just being able to one see her story and just even the transformation of her name. I think that matters, and so I think that's a really cool conversation to have with children. And again, it's just wonderful to hear the words come from the writer of the book. So
thank you.
thank you. So as we're coming towards the end, what would you say would be some advice that you would love to give to aspiring artists, whether that is writing, just in your field? Well, and they're looking and listening to this maybe either now or later. What would be some advice you would give them?
I would say that I think it's important to find a writing community. to, you know, there's a number of ways to do that, to seek out other writers and to share your work. I think sharing your work is a way of growing your work. Getting feedback is really important. I think it's pretty impossible to grow as a writer without reading, especially without reading the genre and for the audience that you're writing for. I've met several aspiring writers, and I ask them, what are you reading right now? Like, what books are you reading? What books inspire you? And they're like, I don't really read, a lot of children's books. I don't really read middle grade. And I think, how do you plan to write for the audience if you don't read that genre? So you have to read the genre. You have to connect with other writers to get really valuable feedback.
I love that advice. Do you have anything that I know you've written, and I asked you earlier just the number of books, you said close, if not 25 books, but what do you desire next in your career?
I'm just looking to tell, I'm looking to always like challenge myself creatively. I want to, just find new ways to tell stories that interest me, whether it's from 100 years ago or 50 years in the future. I just really want to find a way to always be challenging myself and growing and finding those stories that haven't been told before, or finding a new way to tell stories. I think that's really where that's what I'm looking at. Yeah, that's it. That's what I want to do. Just find new ways to tell stories, and also finding ways to find more balance in my life. I think sometimes I spend way too much time working and not enough time having fun. But that's like, I'll probably give you like too TMI, but like I just need to find ways to find more balance in my life would be great.
I love it. I mean, it's not TMI. I need to hear it because it matters, especially if we want to do what we love for a long time.
Exactly. Exactly.
We have to take care of ourselves. So, as a writer, I'm someone who's an avid reader, and I love words. I'm really big about words, and so I wanted to end with: do you have any words of affirmation or mantras that you kind of live by, or say to yourself, or you've created? I'm someone, like I said, who loves words. I have mantras and quotes all around my house. And so is there anything that maybe has been said to you, or you have really hold on to as like word of affirmation for yourself?
Well, I mean, every year my girlfriend and we come up with like 2 words that we try to, each year I come up with 1 or 2 words that I try to focus on for the year. So I do that. But also, as I look to my left, I do have, it's actually a quote from, I think it's Winston Churchill. I don't know. Not that I'm a fan of Winston Churchill, but it is a poster thing that I have over here, that it's a little card that it just says, never, 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 never give up. So I remember that always, that I'm never going to give up. And also one of the things that I kind of live by, that I think about from when I was first starting writing, is that the stories that I'm interested in are enough, and that nobody can tell me that the stories that I want to pursue or write aren't marketable, aren't valuable, that the stories that I want to pursue about my culture, my legacy, my ancestry aren't marketable or valuable is not true. So the stories that I love and value are enough. And so I think that all writers should remember that the stories that you love and value are enough, no matter what they're about, and you should pursue them.
I love it. Well, I wanted to say thank you, Lesa, so much for your time. You definitely have dropped nuggets, whether you know it or not. Even just now, just saying, what we write and what we truly are going after is enough. And we have to believe that. I think that whenever you're pursuing a goal, there is going to be that time where the motivation is there, but then you have to be consistent in it, right? And sometimes it's not always going to be easy, but passion and understanding and knowing that it's what you're meant to be and what you're meant to do will kind of push you over. And so I love that, because I think a part of pursuing anything, you have those moments of doubt.
Yes.
right?
Hmm.
And so you have to have, you know, kind of like your own confirmation of what you're doing. So thank
Yeah.
you so much. I know some people have been commenting. David, thank you. He's like, he loved the story. This is amazing.
Oh,
And
thank you.
those who watch it later, definitely will look out for your comments if you have questions. If you see at the bottom, I have at the bottom where you can continue to follow Lesa and her work and be able to learn more. Is there any other platform that people can go if they want to stay connected to what you're doing?
Well, I am on Instagram now. That's new for me. I'm on Instagram and Twitter, and yeah, Instagram and Twitter. That's where you can find me.
I still have not figured
Yeah.
out Twitter. So are you a big tweet person? I don't understand Twitter.
I mean, I occasionally tweet and I retweet, but you know,
I
I'm
was
doing the best
told
I can.
that's where writers should be. I'm like, okay, well, I don't know what to do, but
I don't
we'll
know,
figure
you
it
know.
out.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. Thank you those who are watching, and I look forward to seeing more of your amazing work come throughout the years and staying connected. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your amazing work too. Thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much. All right. See you all. Take care. Until next time.
Okay. All right. Bye bye.